Welcome to this Aztlander presentation, Excavations at Aztec-period houses and terraces at Calixtlahuaca, Mexico, with Michael E. Smith of Arizona State University. Enjoy.
So Calixtlahuaca is west of the Valley of Mexico, west of Tenochtitlan over the mountains. It's near one of the tall volcanoes in central Mexico that I've circled here in blue. It's in the Toluca Valley. The Nevada de Toluca is the third highest mountain in Mexico, and it's a large valley, very rich farmland. The site was first excavated in the 1930s by José García Payón, who excavated the famous circular temple at the top here and a few other temples at the bottom. And he found lots of vessels and offerings and burials, and that stuff is just sitting there in Toluca. I've studied it, but no one's published any of these offering materials yet. There are a lot of sculptures. There are more Mexica-style sculptures, classical Aztec-style sculptures at Calixtlahuaca than any other city outside of Tenochtitlan. We're not sure why. This standing Axayacatl on the right, it's about 7-8 feet tall, is was excavated at Temple 3 at Calixtlahuaca. But in addition to Mexica-style sculptures, there's a local style. A lot of these are reliefs, and here's a couple of examples. And there's the Roman figurine. That was a figurine supposedly found at Calixtlahuaca. I made a lot of effort to try to track it down. It cannot be securely documented. It's not described during the field work. There's no photographs of it. There's no drawings. There's no record in the field notes. But Garcia Payón claimed that he excavated it there. And of course, what it means is that Julius Caesar came over and conquered Calixtlahuaca. And wait a minute, Julius Caesar had been long dead by the time Calixtlahuaca developed. Well, okay. Well, the diffusionists still have fun with this figurine. It's frustrating because you can't really prove that that it's a fake or that it wasn't found at the site. You can't prove that it was found there either. I directed a project 2006 and 7. We did surface archaeology at the site and then a season of excavations. The site is laid out on the side of a hill, Cerro Tenismo, and this is an artist's reconstruction of a market at the site. Because it's on a hill, doing archaeology there involves lots of intrepid hiking around the hill. And here's a famous Mesoamericanist. I won't say who, maybe someone knows who this is. Intrepid explorer. So our project, we wanted to know what domestic life was like. We wanted to excavate houses. What's it like to have a city built on a hillside, and what's the sort of political and economic context of Calixtlahuaca? We've published a bunch of papers on the site in English and in Spanish, ethnobotany, the houses, the surface collections, chronology. The latest one is bottom there, lithic tool provisioning. And one monograph, the geoarchaeology of a terrace landscape. This is mainly the work of Alex Boresha. I am a co-author, but it's mostly Alex's work, and this is a brilliant monograph on the geoarchaeology of residences and terraces at Calixtlahuaca. Now, right now I'm working on it again because we didn't get our final report in. So I'm working on my final report for the Mexican government, and then we hope it'll be published in one of these BAR, big red volumes where you want all the details, we'll give them to you. So we're working on assembling that right now. The official site by the Mexican government, INA, was laid out on the side of the hill to encompass the major civic architecture. You see on the right there that the modern village of San Francisco Calixtlahuaca running up onto the site. So we started off with a survey in 2006 and walked all over the site and collected artifacts. We found that the area that was pretty intensively occupied. It was much bigger than the Ina archaeological zone. And so the darker colors are denser collections. We did standard 5 by 5 meter artifact collections, and then looked at the density in each field that we went through. Um, and this is sort of an abstraction, a map of where we think the main occupation was, the light color, and then a probable occupation, the striped area, sort of steep hills, and we can't really show whether or not there was occupation there, but we think maybe there was. So we had 27 excavation areas. Several of them were to find the borders of the site, and a lot of them were in the central part of the site. And this is the area here. This includes on the left side there, that's the royal palace. Of course, there's a sign that says it was a Calmecac, which was an Aztec school, but it wasn't. It was the royal palace. It looks exactly like Aztec royal palaces look. There's lots of reasons to show that. On the right in the middle there is the circular temple on the Axayacatl temple on a big platform. And then down toward the bottom is another temple. It's often called the Tlaloc temple because some Tlaloc vessels were excavated and offerings there. But the red dots are our excavations. We had 3 tests near the palace. We don't really have good excavations of remains from Aztec palaces, and so they wouldn't let us excavate within the sort of fenced palace area. But we put some test pits right outside the fence, and well, didn't turn up very much. 3 excavations of drains and terraces, agricultural terraces, and the drains are these channels coming down from the hill. We'll talk more about them in a minute. We had 7 excavations looking for houses, and 6 of them found houses. We did pretty well there. So these 2 houses, units 307 and 309, I'd say high rent district because if you look at the top photo here, we're taking a picture from the area of the circular temple down toward the palace. And you can see in the photo here, after this baguette, with the excavations, and then there's a modern house there, and then the royal palace in the background. Unit 307, we dug there because it's sort of a level area, flat area on the sloping hillside, and found a house. This is an actively plowed field, and so a lot had been destroyed, but there was part of a pavement and several walls. And on the uphill side of the structure was a dense midden. What you see there is a pit that was excavated into the tepetate. That's the sea horizon sort of hard pan that underlies a lot of the area in central Mexico. And so a pit had been excavated down into the tepetate and filled with trash. We got 10,000 potsherds out of a 10-centimeter level in a 1x2. This is the densest deposit I've ever excavated. 34 bags of sherds. You're a German student here showing you the 34 bags that came out of that one level. 87 kilos of pottery. Down the hills, Unit 309. Again, it was sort of a level area on the hill, so we put in a test pit. We found a pavement. And you can see Angela Huster in the white shirt with the hat on it, and Angela's co-editing the final reports of the project with me. And this turns out to be what the house looked like. And this is a house with a room, and then in the foreground, a possible extra room next to the house. There's I think 3 different stages of pavement on the downslope, the left side of the house here. Very nicely made stone pavements and some artifact deposits off to the side, some trash deposits. We got a lot of this stuff in the excavations. This is burned daub. This is when you make a wattle and daub house. You use mud in your house. You build a wooden frame. You sort of make your walls with mud. Here's a house in Yucatan, wattle and daub, thatched roof, and a few little diagrams here, a couple of different ways it was made. And the thing about these houses is if they burn down, what happens is the wattle, the sticks burn up and that fires the daub. So rather than being just mud packed in there, it becomes fired clay, this stuff. And so you can get an idea of the nature of the wattle and the nature of the walls from the impressions. So here's one is a nice, actually squared off piece that might have been sort of like these panels flanking the door on this Maya house. Um, After working for quite a while in the state of Morelos, where nobody plants their fields before the end of May when the rains start, we're excavating here. The farmer had given us permission. Then he came in the end of March and said, "Well, okay, I want to start plowing. Fill in your excavations." So, wait a minute, it's only March as well. So we had to start backfilling while we were still drawing. We managed to get out of this without burying any students, though. Um, Now this is one of our excavations, Unit 311, that shows you how terracing works at Calixtlahuaca. Um, Off on the left there, you see a platform that's next to the Tlaloc Temple. But this field, maize is being grown at this time. We have a trench that goes right across. And here's the field when we were excavating. We're looking the other direction, the downslope to the left, upslope to the right, and the trench going across. And one of the real achievements of Alex Beresha and Charles Frederick, the geoarchaeologists, to show how ancient terracing worked at Calixtlahuaca. You originally had fairly narrow terraces, some too many meters wide. They built houses on there. They farmed. They grew corn, and then at the beginning of the colonial period, the site was abandoned, and I'll get back later to why that happened or how that happened. So the houses fall down, and you have these terraces, and then there's a certain amount of erosion and things washing downhill, but the landscape became stabilized in the colonial period and stayed that way for several centuries, um, until the 19th century, which is the late 19th century, is when hacendados were basically stealing lands from villages and throughout Mexico, and farmers had found their lands fenced off and unavailable, so they went back up to the hill and started farming the hill. But the problem was these Aztec terraces were not wide enough for their oxen. The oxen couldn't turn around. What was the solution? Well, you produce double wide terraces. You sort of get rid of every other terrace. It gives you a wider terrace. So on the terrace wall, you see on the left there has the original stones from the Aztec period terraces in green, and then the built-up terraces in white. That original house that was on the middle terrace here, it's completely wiped out. Now, construction materials and artifacts, they're still around, but they're incorporated into the terrace fill. They don't have a good context. They don't have a prevenient good context. Um, Sometimes they made it triple wide, and that was the case in this Unit 311. They took out two terraces through and ended up with a triple wide. So when that happens, the original house on the downslope terrace is buried. So if you dig at the outer end of the terrace, you might find buried houses, which is what we were looking for. If you dig further up the terrace, you're not going to find anything, at least in terms of intact house deposits. So here's 311. Under that green area, we might find intact post-classic deposits, and under the rest of the field, nothing, which is what we found. So we reverse the thing here. Digging 311, and there's the house. The slope goes down to the right. The lower wall of this house is eroded away, but the back wall is in good shape and part of one of the side walls. In fact, the back wall is really nice. This is, a nice cut stone, much nicer than the Aztec houses I excavated in Morelos, which are just, boulders, stones used for the foundation. These were nice cut stones. Um, okay, here's another excavation. We had seen a bunch of stuff eroding out of an area of active erosion that we walked by quite a bit, so we decided to excavate and see what we could find. And we came down on a house floor that had burned. And actually, the initial excavations went through the floor. We went, oops. Um, this is burned daub, the white chunks on top of a burned floor. And we removed the daub, and there's the burned floor. We had lots of burned daub in this project. In fact, my wife Cindy was running our lab, and she said, "Stop bringing that stuff in. There's too much." We had more than a half ton of of burned daub. We did analysis of some of it, but and then when we removed the burned floor, we found a canal. This is an early canal on the side of the hill, and here's another excavation. This is just up from the previous one. They were leveling this lot to build a house. Now, I think that's technically illegal to build a house in an archaeological zone, but the authorities knew they were doing it, and they did it. And we asked for permission to go in and excavate before they built their house, and found the house, found an Aztec house. We started off by locating a pavement. Actually, the the heavy equipment that this family brought in at first level found this pavement, and then they said, "Hey, you want to dig this?" And we said, "Yeah." And so what you have is a series of those. What you see are exterior pavements. Do I have a? No, I don't. I have a diagram of where the house was. The house was sort of toward the back between those two sets of pavements. And some of the houses were pretty complicated, such as this one, Unit 316, Stratigraphy. Here's a Harris diagram. Three time periods. Dongu was the initial construction of a terrace, and then you had a bunch of stuff going on in the Nupi period, and finally in the Yata period. Um, we'll get back to chronology in a bit. All the deposits were screened. We had a crew of local women washing sherds, and we had, I forget what the final total is. I think a little bit less than 500,000 pot sherds in 6 months of excavation. And so the house and the students were living in Calixtlahuaca always had like lots of sherds drying in the courtyard. And don't walk across here and kick these because then you screw up the provenience. Um, here's another excavation. We saw little pavements sticking out when in an area that was eroding, and followed it out. And this is what we found. Wow, pretty exciting, right? Bunch of walls and things. Here's what we think is going on. That you had two houses, two structures. Maybe the back one might have been a storage facility, house, and the house was sitting on a platform. And the lower part of the platform, of course, is eroded away. Um, we had a very deep deposit on the little floodplain area near the palace. We tested the edge of the site and found nada. We didn't expect to find anything, and we didn't find it. Um, we had two of our students who worked with us in 2006 met on the project and got married. Uh, so a bunch of us went up to the wedding. It was in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And at the reception, all of the tables were labeled with a site, right? So I was sitting at the Monte Alban table, and the head table was Calixtlahuaca. Um, we had a lab. We still have our materials there at a school, the Colegio Mexiquense, right outside of Toluca. It's an old hacienda, and we have our lab in a sort of some of the agricultural outbuildings. And what we did is we took of our sherd washers, we took the sort of best four, the four women that were sort of smartest and best workers, and hired them to work on our ceramics. And they were quickly, I mean, even when they started, they had been washing sherds. They were better with the ceramics than most students coming down from the US. They would instruct our students. And so domestic life, this is one of our themes. We wanted to look at house form, domestic artifacts, social patterns. Um, there was a lot of use of maguey. I mean, there's maguey at the site, and actually the maguey is actively being harvested for agua miel to make pulque. Um, but if you don't make pulque and the stalk, the reproductive stalk comes up from the maguey, and then you can use that as a beam. And here are the impressions on a piece of burned daub that show pretty clearly that it was made from a maguey stalk. Um, and here's an interpretation of what houses may have looked like on a terrace. Michael Stasinos is the artist. Oh, he's got a dog there, doesn't he? Look at that little dog standing there. Language and ethnicity. The original name of the site was Matlatzinco, which meant both the Toluca Valley and the capital of the Toluca Valley, and Matlatzinca meant people of Matlatzinco. But Matlatzinca was the name given to a language by modern scholars. So were these people Matlatzincas? Well, maybe they were Matlatzincas who didn't speak Matlatzinca. Um, Four languages were spoken in the Toluca Valley at the time of the Spanish conquest: Matlatzinca, Mazawa, Otomi, and Nahuatl. We really can't nail it down any closer than this. The Matlatzincas, here's what Sahagún thinks about the Matlatzincas on the bottom there, that they worked with nets and they had advanced hairstyle. Domestic ceramics, these are for the burials that Garcia Payón excavated. This is more my style. This is what we found in the excavations, but we use the hull vessels to work out initial typology of the vessels of especially the polychrome types, decorated types, and then use that typology to assign the sherds to categories. Um, Tamales. One of the interesting things is that there's not a lot of comals. A comal is a tortilla griddle. And most Aztec sites in central Mexico have lots of comals. I would say at the sites I excavated in Morelos, maybe 10% of all the sherds are comal sherds. But there's very few comals in at Calixtlahuaca. So we know they were cultivating maize. We have burned maize seeds and pollen and so on. We think they were eating their maize in terms of in tamales and not in terms of tortillas. Now then the question is, well, what did they make the tamales in? And do we have the tamale vessels? And guess we don't, unfortunately. Domestic ritual, we have figurines. Some are local styles, like on the bottom. Some are like Aztec styles. The women's head on the top right there, the figurines. Couple of pipes. A lot of biconical incense burners. Um, Musical instruments. Um, these are we have rattles, flutes, rattles and whistles here. I don't see any flutes. Well, no, a couple flutes. Um, and we had these studied by Ajay Both, who's a music archaeologist, German music archaeologist. We had at least one whistle. I think technically it's supposed to call it an ocarina. That was entire and would still play. And Ajay played this and recorded it and did analysis of the sound. And I was going to play it for you. I will give it one more try, but I was fiddling with this right before the talk and I couldn't get the darn thing to play. Yeah, I get an error. All right, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. So, are we back? Do you see all this? We see, yeah, okay. Another interesting thing, the dog wants to play here. I have a dog trying to play with me. Um, Sherd discs. These are little discs made out of potsherds, and we have more sherd discs than any site I've ever seen in Mesoamerica. We had thousands of these, literally thousands, and you can tell what kind of pottery they're made from. You can see the decoration, and you can tell this is a jar and this is a bowl. And we don't know what the heck these were used for. We studied the heck out of these things. I mean, we measured every single one, and we thought, well, maybe there's, size modes. There's small, medium, and large. That means something. And no, there's no size patterning. The type of ceramic nothing seems to show much of a pattern. So what were these things used for? Well, maybe they were for gambling. Maybe Calixtlahuaca was the Las Vegas of central Mexico. Patoli was a game that was played by the Aztecs, or they had some kind of markers that they moved around a board, and maybe they were used for that. I don't know. Mystery artifacts. Um, Another theme is the hilltop, the nature of having a city on a hilltop. Actually, this is sort of interesting. This photograph, this is an old abandoned hacienda. And I was out here taking pictures, so I thought it was sort of cool. It's a cool building. And that would have been the main courtyard of the hacienda. Now they're growing corn in it. And I'm walking around taking pictures, and this guy said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just taking pictures." He says, "You want to buy this place and open it as a tourist center?" And I don't think so. Um, so the site area covers 2.5 square kilometers. We reconstructed the population at close to 10,000 people. Um, So Donggu was the initial occupation going back to almost to 1000 AD. And one of the interesting things is that they were the Donggu occupation covers most of the main part of the site. It's not as if they began in a small area and then got larger. The Nupis, the middle period, going up to 1400 AD, and then the final time period, Yata, and the occupation expands across the sort of southeastern part of the site. This is some of the geoarchaeology, Alex. This is sort of cool. This shows the history of a gully going down the hill at Calixtlahuaca. On the top, there's just a minor gully caused by erosion. People came in and built terraces on the hill. So they extended the second stage here. They extended the terraces into the gully to trap the water to make the terraces bigger. And then they built sidewalls on the terraces. So the terraces have these sidewalls, not just downslope walls. And the water was channeled, and we called those drains. And then when the site was abandoned, the walls collapsed and the erosion just wiped out what had been the drains and end up with what you see today. Um, and Alex calls these master drains. These are the blue lines here. They're going from the top of the hill down through the occupation of the site. And one of the main purposes of these is to channel the water so that when it rains, when the rains come down, they don't destroy the terraces because the water's channeled. And the thing about terraces is as long as you're maintaining them, it's great. But if you stop maintaining them, they can wash away in a season. Let's skip that. So, there's quite a few hilltop terraced sites in Mesoamerica, but they have distinctive patterns. If you start at the Xochicalco on the top right, the terrace walls run all the way around the hill at Xochicalco. You could follow one terrace wall and you'll walk a mile going around the hill. And the opposite end of the spectrum is the sites of the Valley of Oaxaca, such as Motel Bomb. Terraces, little blobs built by individual families for housing and farming. And Palmillo, cited by Gary Feynman, has small terraces, but they're rectangular. And Calixtlahuaca is sort of in the middle. In fact, it's in the middle if you have a scale of how are these things planned. And at Montalban, clearly farmers were planning their own terraces. This was a small scale, bottom up kind of process. At Xochicalco, these were centrally planned. Farmers weren't doing their individual terraces, otherwise you wouldn't have these big terraces that run for miles. So Calixtlahuaca is in the middle. It had these rectangular terraces with the side walls, and some of the monumental architecture is on the terraces, some of it's on the hilltop, and you have drains sort of running between them. Larger context, Calixtlahuaca as a capital, conquest by the Aztec Empire, and so on. Just a few remarks. How do we know Calixtlahuaca was capital of the Toluca Valley? Um, it was the largest city in the Toluca Valley, had the biggest palace and temples, and there's historical documents. The Atenco lawsuit, I'm going to come back to it a little bit. It's sort of a cool document. One of the things they did in this lawsuit is they brought in a bunch of old guys and said, "How were things in ancient times?" And a lot of them said, "The town of San Francisco Calixtlahuaca, in the present town, was a city called Matlatzinco that ruled this entire valley." And a lot of these witnesses in this lawsuit say the same thing. Um, and so it had the big temples, it was the large site, and so it was capital of the Toluca Valley. Part of its economy was based on maguey. We have these are spindle whorls used to spin maguey fiber. There's one cotton whorl. See the little one? That's used to spin cotton fiber. Now we found very few of those at Calixtlahuaca. You can't grow cotton in this area. They imported cotton from Morelos or someplace else. But they did grow maguey. And on the right are the scrapers, maguey scrapers. Obsidian. Obsidian is there's Brad Andrews, our obsidian expert. Um, Most Aztec sites in central Mexico, green obsidian predominates. Green obsidian is from the Pachuca source area. And, for example, at Yautepec, where I excavated, I think 95% of the obsidian is green. Um, at Calixtlahuaca, it's something like 40% is green. It's a lot more gray obsidian. And this gray obsidian is mostly coming from the western obsidian sites, Ucareo and Zinapecuaro, which are off to the west, and Tarascan territory was much more heavily used by the people of Calixtlahuaca than by most of the other Aztec peoples of central Mexico. Other imports, um, copper and bronze. Um, On the lower left, there are some bronze bells that are from offerings that Garcia Payón excavated. On the top right are copper artifacts. You have a couple of bell fragments, some tweezer fragments, little pendants and sheet metal and things. Um, these are the first excavation we did, the first major house excavation, Unit 307, the one with the 10,000 sherds from one trash deposit, produced all of this copper. It's about 15 pieces of copper, 14 pieces of copper. We thought, wow, there's going to be a lot of that at the site. And then this is like half the copper from the whole project. So for whatever reason, there was lots at that one site. Lower right is Aztec black on orange pottery, imported from the Valley of Mexico. We know that typologically, we know it because the paste is very um, hard and fine, and we've done some chemical analysis too, neutron activation, petrographic analysis. Um, so the city on the hill. The There's quite a few reliefs at the site that show an individual, probably a king, with arrows and a shield. And here's two of them. And the shield has a bird element in it. And what is that bird? Well, we're not sure, but my father-in-law, who's a biologist, said it's a turkey. All right, I'll take that. Um, some of the documents from the 16th century say that the Lord of Calixtlahuaca was called Chimaltecatl, which means shield lord. in Nahuatl. And he says the lords of Toluca are the descendants of the Chimales, who are the rulers of Calixtlahuaca. And so it's possible that Shield or Chimal was the name of the dynasty, and the turkey or whatever bird this is was the emblem of the dynasty. We did a lot of searching. Well, are there any toponyms in the area that have the word for turkey in any of the relevant languages? And no, there's not. Um, the sculptures were analyzed by Emily Umberger. We published a paper on that. Calixtlahuaca was conquered by Axayacatl in around 1476, 1478. This is from the Tizoc stone on the left and from the Codex Telleriano-Remensis on the right. Um, the a net element, and you see the net in each of these, was the symbol of the Matlatzinco peoples. And so what you see is Mexica kings conquering the people of the net or conquering the Toluca Valley. Rene Garcia Castro, historian, has reconstructed what happened after Axayacatl conquered Calixtlahuaca. And basically, he divided up the Toluca Valley to his family members and to his other cities. And so this whole area became divided up. Some land he took for himself. He gave some to Ahuitzotl, who later became emperor. He gave some to Texcoco, Tenochtitlan, and so on. So he conquered the Toluca Valley and partitioned the land to his cronies and fellow city-states. In the lower right, you see the Atenco, little town Atenco. We'll come back to that in a sec. Well, yeah, we'll talk about it right now. I just wanted to mention this because this is the lawsuit where they brought in all these old guys to say, how were things in ancient times? And they said, oh, Matlatzinco was the capital. But the lawsuit is really fascinating. The Marquesado was the estate of Hernan Cortez. Right after Cortez conquered Mexico, the Spanish crown gave him an estate and a title. And his estate had lands in three areas. One was in Oaxaca. One was in Morelos, basically what is now the modern state of Morelos, and the other was in the Toluca Valley. And those were his estate. And there was a lawsuit about this village of Atenco because the Marquesado said Atenco should be part of the Marquesado, therefore they should be paying them taxes and giving them labor and so on. And Atenco said, no, no, no. Says, we may have been subject to Calixtlahuaca in ancient times, which is what these old guys, old witnesses were telling them. But after the Mexica conquest, we were not subject to them. We were separate. Okay. Well, the Marquesado said, well, the Mexica Empire was not legitimate. The Aztec Empire was not legitimate, and we should not pay any attention to its conquest. If we want to reconstruct the situation in Toluca Valley, we need to go back before the Mexica conquest, back before go to the pre-Mexica situation. And the lawyers for Atenco were very clever. They said, well, if the Mexica conquest was not legitimate, what does that imply about the Spanish conquest of Mexico? If you fine for the Marquesado and say that the Mexica Empire was not legitimate, this would cast doubt on the legal legitimacy of the Spanish conquest of Mexico. And the judge says, fine, Atenco wins. The judge was not willing to open the door and say, well, maybe the Spanish conquest was not legitimate. Anyway, Rene Garcia Castro and Maria Teresa Jarquin wrote up this lawsuit, and actually Rene provided me with a full transcript of the suit. They didn't publish the full transcript, which was really cool because I could search and find these old guys talking about the way things were in the Toluca Valley in ancient times. But what happened to Calixtlahuaca after the Spanish conquest? One of the things, when I excavated Yautepec, for example, we found a fair amount of colonial stuff. And one of the houses we dug in Yautepec started off in the late Postclassic, and continued on into the colonial period. So you had glazed pottery and iron artifacts and cow bones and horse bones and stuff. And so Yautepec was an Aztec city, and the Spaniards moved in, they built a convent and a church, and it became a Spanish city, and it's a city today. Well, Calixtlahuaca, there's very little colonial stuff. You have the late post-classic materials. There's a little bit, a few um, figurines of Spaniards, but there's very little Spanish occupation. Well, turns out that the Spanish friars came to the Toluca Valley and they decided we're going to build a church in what is now Toluca, Toluca de Lerdo. Um, and they basically forced everybody from Calixtlahuaca to move into Toluca. It's sort of a forced resettlement. Why did they do that? Well, shortly after the Spanish conquest, the Spanish authorities did a lot of moving native peoples around, partly so they'd have labor to build their churches, partly so they could, convert them to Christianity, they could control people, and for a variety of reasons, there was a lot of movement of people. And so this is one case. We found a document. Well, we found a document. Rene Garcia Castro found a document, which he provided. It was very, very nice. That talks about this. So they moved the people into Toluca to build the church, and so there's a discussion in Toluca about what was the earliest settlement like, and when was it founded by Spaniards, and there's a cool blog if you're interested in colonial architecture. Richard Perry has a blog called Colonial Mexico. And he's published a bunch of books on colonial architecture, and probably some of you know his work. Um, but in Toluca, the lost monastery of Toluca, there was a Franciscan monastery and church, uh, and it was eventually torn down, and people don't know that much about it. But there was probably the initial church construction around 1530. The original church and convent probably looked like this. This is actually a different one. This is Zinacantepec, which is not too far in the Toluca Valley. It's a nicely preserved 16th century church and convent. And actually, it's cool. It's a museum of early colonial life. Well worth a visit. Um, and I don't know, the population of Calixtlahuaca was around 8,000, and after the conquest, it really sort of drooped down. Because native peoples were dying from diseases, and lots of Spaniards didn't move into Toluca till later, and eventually Toluca grew and flourished, and after the Mexican Revolution, it became after the independence, became the capital of the state of Mexico, and a journalist in Toluca captured this process in a nice article from a number of years ago. The nostalgia of power, make the contrast between the pre-Hispanic period when Calixtlahuaca was a major capital, was the center of things in the Toluca Valley, and Toluca, Tolocan, was probably just a small village. And then after the Spanish conquest and then up into the modern period, Tolocan or Toluca grew into the major capital and city. And right now, the village of San Francisco Calixtlahuaca is a little village um, subject to Toluca. It's part of the Municipio de Toluca. And just one more cool thing before I finish up here. Um, this is a church in San Francisco, Calixtlahuaca. It's not 16th century, it's, I don't know, 17th or 18th century. And in the wall of the church, where you see the arrow is this carved relief. It's just sitting there. And so this probably came from this area. We don't know exactly, but and why it was in the wall of the church, but it has the date in both the Christian calendar and the Aztec calendar. The top, it says 1563 Año, and at the bottom is 6 Reed. If you extend the Aztec year count forward from 1519, the year 1563 is 6 Reed. So for whatever reason, someone carved dates in these two systems in this stone. We don't know where it was. And then someone later picked it up and put it into the wall of the church. And they clearly weren't paying any attention to reading this piece because they just threw it in sideways on the church wall. So I'm out of time now, and that was Calixtlahuaca. So thank you very much. I can take some questions. See, this is the original Aztec calendar stone, right? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Let me see if we have any questions. I don't actually see any questions. Um, but one guy I've been in contact with, Daniel Hernandez, he's from Calixtlahuaca. So Danielle, if you want to unmute and meet Dr. Smith, yeah, Danielle, you have any questions?
We no escu we're not no escucha. I can answer the one question here from Joy. You found any intact vessels, or have they all been sherds? We have a few. I expected to find more because Garcia Payón found several hundred vessels. They were mostly in burials near the temples. Now we weren't excavating that kind of context, and we had very few burials, but we have a few whole vessels, not too many of them.
All right. And then do you think they were all locally made, or were there any from Teotihuacan or any other place?
Well, they were mostly made in the either at Calixtlahuaca or somewhere in the Toluca Valley. I mean, we have some imports we can document from the Valley, Mexico, a couple of Cholula shirts, a couple of things from Morelos, some things from the West. No Tarascan ceramics. I'm very surprised. We're not far from the Tarascan border. Um, And we know there was trade across the Tarascan border because Tarascan obsidian turns up at Calixtlahuaca and also other sites throughout central Mexico. Um, and green obsidian turns up at Tarascan sites. So we thought there'd be some Tarascan ceramics and actually did not find any at all. That was one of the surprises of the project.
Hmm. Uh, I realized my audio was off when I was saying that Danielle, who's unmuted himself, he lives in or he used to live in. He's from Calixtlahuaca, and uh, he'd like to start a professional relationship with you. So Danielle, do you have anything to say? Oh, once again, doesn't matter if my audio is on or off. Danielle, you there?
Louis, we
Danielle,
can't hear.
well, once again, meanwhile,
You can email me.
um, Catherine asked, do any of those ceramics have holes punched on the bottom?
Oh, no. What? No. I don't know. The only ceramics I can think of with holes in the bottom is we found in the Outback, we found colonial sugar processing vessels where they would process the sugar cane and mash it up and poke it into these big urns that have a hole in the bottom, and the molasses would go out through the bottom of the vessel. But that's sort of an odd thing. But no, the standard Aztec ceramics, I can't think of any with holes.
Huh. All right. And Joey said you talked about structures had been burned. Were these accidental or done on purpose?
Oh man, that's a um there there are conflicting ideas in the literature about whether a wattle and daub house will burn down, if your fire gets out of control, or whether you have to deliberately burn it. And I found a number of accounts that said these houses won't burn unless you go, and you stack some kindling in there and really work on it to get a house to burn. You really have to want to burn it down. But talking to Alex Baresha, he had read a number of accounts that in various places around the world that still have wattle and daub houses, it's not too hard to set it on fire if you're not careful. So, um, I can't really say for sure whether these houses were deliberately burned down or, accidentally burned up. That's a very good question. I wish I could answer it.
And it looks like Danielle has muted himself, so maybe his English is not that good or something. And I texted him, do you want to speak to Dr. Smith? But come on, Danielle, you don't want to say anything? All right, he's unmuted. Danielle. Jeez. Daniel quiere decir algo. That's sure strange for him to unmute, mute, unmute, and then still not.
Trouble with the audio.
Microphone. Huh. Oh, well. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been really good.
We've got another question here. The metal artifacts imported from the Tarascan area. And the short answer is yes. Dorothy Hosler studied our artifacts. And while it's possible there was some bronze production in the Toluca Valley, was almost certainly imported from the Tarascan area of West Mexico. So the answer, yeah.
Okay. Did you visit the palace?
Well, yeah, so we're there quite a bit. And it was completely buried by erosion when Garcia Payón. It was just nothing there, and he had to clear the whole thing out. Now it's part of the tourist, it's part of the archaeological zone, and you pay your ticket to go see the pyramids, and you can get in and see the palace.
Alrighty. Everybody's thanking you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you everybody for being a good audience. And we'll see you at some other presentation.
And here, a person's just now coming in. They're what, an hour late? Oh, well. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. That was really good.
Okay, so long everybody.
Thank you, Michael. And thanks for watching this Aztlander presentation. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. To subscribe to free monthly issues of the Aztlander magazine of the Americas, contact your host, Jim Reed, at jimreedmaya@gmail.com. Thanks again.